Hi, Emily Dorrell. Nice to have you. Emily is the social media communications director for Code Pink. She holds a BA in rhetoric and media studies from Lewis and Clark College and an MA in communication studies from California State University, Northridge, where she worked alongside Reverend James Lawson for his course on nonviolent resistance as a part of CSUN's Civil Discourse and Social Change Initiative. She's honored to be a part of Kappa's Peace Summit and looks forward to collaborating to make the world a better place. So from here, Emily, just go right into your discussion today.
Thank you, Lucille, and thank you to Chicago Area Peace Action for inviting me to speak today. I'm really happy to see all these faces and look forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Are you able to see this colorful? Okay, cool. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about social media as a tool for change. And it can be kind of a controversial, I guess, topic because social media can do a lot of damage, but I am of the opinion that it can also do a lot of good. So we're going to hopefully talk about how we can harness that today. And I think starting off, the first thing I want to kind of mention is something that I think a lot of people tend to forget about social media, is that social media is ultimately social. So you don't want it to be a one-sided kind of like show, I guess. It's a conversation. It requires back and forth. And I think that's really important because I see a lot of activists and organizations going about it as kind of like a soapbox and less of a give and take. And I think that's where the power really lies. So that's, I guess, the first thing is always to remember it's a social platform. So we want to talk with each other and start conversations. So I'm just going to go right into it. I'm going to talk about what works for Code Pink. So I work for Code Pink Women for Peace, run all their social media platforms and accounts. And so what we do in approaching our content strategy for reaching the most people, getting the most engagement, what we find works. I look a lot at numbers and stats and keep track of stuff that way. So that's how I've kind of come up with these particular 4 things I think are necessary for really creating content that's impactful. And I'm sorry if you hear my computer revving a little bit, it's struggling right now. So if you hear the engine, that's what's going on. Or the motor, excuse me. So I think the most important thing is that with social media, you want to make it relatable and accessible, especially since there are so many different demographics, age groups, people with different levels of knowledge, people from different countries that are all using social media in much the similar way and have similar access. You want to make it easily digestible for folks so that it doesn't turn people off immediately when they don't know what's happening. And it's easy to do this because there's so much going on in the world and activists know already so much about it and want to get kind of further into the weeds of these conflicts and these issues. And that's okay sometimes, but making sure you kind of take it back to the basics also as well. So you're serving those people who are new and just trying to learn and start off in their activism journey. So that's one way I think is really important for kind of developing content, is making sure you kind of break it down and engage all those folks, particularly your targeted audience. So I'll go over that a little bit in a bit. Another thing is timeliness. I don't think the anti-war, anti-imperialism, environmental movement has any issues with timeliness because everything is so urgent and things are changing constantly. So this isn't really a huge issue that we have in our kind of community, but it is important to make sure that you're responding to things that are happening, because that's how you're going to get the most engagement, the most reaction, and hopefully motivate people to take action immediately when something's urgent. So really hopping on things that are happening. And that's not just including news, but also trends. So if you're on Twitter and you see a trending hashtag on the right-hand side of your page, making sure you're taking advantage of what the internet's currently talking about to try and form it into something that you want to talk about. That way more eyeballs will see what it is you're talking about, basically. So sometimes it requires a little finessing to try and use the current social media trends to your advantage, because oftentimes those trends aren't about foreign policy or environmental catastrophe. But if we can use that to our advantage. The third thing is evaluative. So you want to take a stance. You want to make, I guess it's not always a critical kind of evaluation of the topic you're talking about, because if you just say something kind of like how objectively how you would imagine news would do, although news doesn't always do that, it's not as it doesn't speak as much to people. People really react to critical eyes that point out hypocrisy or point out like moral or ethical problems, something that really speaks to us as being human. So when you kind of put it in that kind of perspective, when you take your own stance, it can really help. And I find that with Code Pink, folks really respond to that. And I will show you some examples of that as we go on. But that's definitely really important, is to kind of take a position and be bold with it too. And then lastly, visual. Visual is so important. They always say image is worth 1,000 words. It really is. And, more and more of our social media platforms are migrating over to be even more visual and more kind of like aesthetically based. Even Twitter, we're seeing it more and more happening, which Twitter was originally a very text-based platform. So I can't say enough how important visuals are in grabbing attention and starting a conversation. I know we're going to do some questions at the end, but did anyone have any questions yet so far with what's going on?
I hope you mentioned infographics.
Oh, I certainly will talk about infographics. Thank you, Robin. Yes, infographics are a big deal with social media and activism. So I'm going to move along to our next, oops, wrong way. Excuse me. All right, so here are some important things to ask yourself. If you are trying to develop content to reach folks, either for yourself or for an organization, whatever it be, asking yourself these questions and making sure you have a very clear answer is important for kind of establishing your broader strategy. So number one, what are your goals? There are so many different goals. You can be seeking more engagement, which is like conversation, comments, stuff like that. You can be seeking brand awareness or account awareness, which is more like how viral your post can be, how many likes it gets, how many shares it gets, stuff like that. You can also, this is less relevant to the kind of work we do here, but brand reputation is another thing that some organizations use this for. So it's important to understand what your goals are so that your content strategy reflects your goals and is adequately serving those. Sorry, I'm making sure, I believe my computer is quickly losing battery because of Canva being open, but we're gonna keep going. Who's your target audience? This is super, super important because your target audience will kind of, your strategy, where you post your content, how you post it, the like medium you decide to use, the kind of framing you use, all depends on your target audience. So if you're targeting Gen Z, for example, you're going to want to try and do TikTok if you can, which can be time consuming, but you're going to want to try and do TikTok. You're going to want to try and do Instagram, maybe Twitter, but you probably want to avoid Facebook because that's less used by that kind of demographic. If you're trying to engage with, people like 65 and older, you're going to probably want to try and do Facebook. So it really depends. And I'll go through, I have a little chart as well that I will bring up, and it will kind of go through the distinctions between these different platforms. Another thing to think about is what, if you have an account you've already been posting on, look at what's worked for you in the past, like what's gotten you the most comments, what's gotten you the most likes, and try and emulate that again, because you have that proven track record of that being successful. So you might as well work with that. It's been proven already. So work with that and kind of finesse that. That's definitely what we've done at Code Pink, and it's been pretty successful, I think. And then lastly, what are successful accounts that are similar to yours, either in the field, community, another activist account? What are they doing that you see is getting a lot of reaction? And one of those things that the last couple of years has really shown a lot of engagement from other accounts, as Robin mentioned, are infographics. So let me go to the next page. So, okay, one thing I want to talk about is there's framing and then there's delivery of your social media content. So framing is a huge aspect of it because you want to make sure whatever you're talking about resonates with your audience. For example, I'm a millennial. As a millennial, I can definitely say that when we're talking about the climate crisis and the future, that definitely gets to me because it horrifies me. So it's good to know what it is. Granted, you can't shove everyone into the same category, but there are some trends that you can do to kind of appeal more to your targeted audience. Sometimes that's rational appeals, sometimes it's emotional appeals. One thing that always gets me is when people my age start talking about questioning having children. That is an emotional appeal that really gets to me. Another thing is with framing, are you being critical of the information, or are you being accepting or even celebrating it? And I'll show you some examples of that because I picked out some of Code Pink's posts that we'll go over, and I'll show you this in more of a tangible way. Your sentiment, is it positive or is it negative? As you probably know, social media is really reactive. So it's probably going to be an extreme. In my experience, granted, this is just with Code Pink's, our audience, positive things do really well, especially on Facebook. People like to see happy things. People like to see, hopeful things, and understandably so. Of course, negative things, when there's something really horrible that's happening and you're angry about it and you're outraged, that can be really powerful too. But it's good to know the kind of impact you're going to be having. And again, it's different for every person's audience. So you kind of have to get to know your social media audiences, because no audience is the same, and it's constantly changing, even for the same account or organization. And then lastly, humorous or serious or somewhere in between. These aren't all binaries. I know I've presented them that way, but it's definitely, you can fall anywhere in between these. Sometimes humor is necessary to talk about these are really, really difficult things. So that's another thing, is I'll show you some memes that I've created that have done really well. And those are some of our best performing posts. So here's that chart I was telling you about that goes over, I'll send this to Lucille. If Lucille, after this, if you want to send this out to folks, this presentation, that's totally fine. I'd love that. So here's the kind of content that does well, your objectives, what demographics in terms of age is most popular with these different platforms. I'm not going to go over the whole thing because I don't want to waste time. But it's just good to realize what you're using which platform for, because it's not going to be the same. And while you can recycle content onto different platforms, which I do all the time, and I'll show you how I do it, you don't want to have the exact same strategy with every single platform because it's totally different platforms. Like, for example, TikTok is really creative and experimental and genuine, whereas, for example, YouTube is in the capacity that at least Code Pink does this, uses YouTube. It's a little more professional, a little less personal. So it's good to realize what these nuances are to best utilize the platforms and make the most of them. So here are some examples of posts that do really well on our Facebook page. Again, this is for our audience. Code Pink has over 100,000 followers. So we have quite a diverse kind of following, and these tend to do well across the board. And I have more on the other page. So, but one that does well all the time, memes. Memes do excellently. Here's this meme I have over here. This one, as you can see, I was really trying to reach younger folk or people that recently graduated from school and maybe have a lot of student debt. So that's one way I did that. And it's kind of a humorous way of dealing with something that can be very painful for people because a lot of people are in a lot of debt. And then what's equally painful is how much money we're spending on F-35 jets. But so a meme can go really far, and I highly recommend using memes. I use meme generator. If you just look up like make a meme, Google it. There's a bunch of different platforms you can that will help you generate these and give you ideas. Another one that does really well is I find pictures that mean a lot to me. Granted, if they are someone's art or something that you don't want to necessarily share without them being credited, like be careful of that. But if it's something that's been shared widely and been given the okay by the creator to share, I think that things like this middle post right here, they do so well because they're simple and they don't require a lot of work on your part. I try and do an average of 10 to 15 posts on Twitter a day, 3 on Facebook. So a lot of the time, it's almost like lowest hanging fruit, to be honest. And if you say something that speaks to you and you can use it to like further your point, I think that's a great idea. And I will speak to the use of articles and YouTube links on Facebook. They, in my experience, with the algorithm, Facebook algorithm, do not do well. I highly recommend avoiding YouTube links. And unfortunately, a lot of links to articles, even if it's what's considered a reputable source, even by Facebook, they don't do nearly as well. And then lastly, on this set, what I also do is I take popular tweets. So I've already like pre-tested it on Twitter, basically. I see what's done really well on Twitter and has a really packs a really good punch. And I basically put it in this pink border and slap a little Code Pink logo on it, and it's good to go. And these do really well and are very good conversation starters as well. Okay. Oops, sorry, went a little too far there. Sorry, okay, there we go. So when I talked about links to articles, there's something about the algorithm where they really don't like links that include any kind of trigger words. The Facebook algorithm is really frustrating. They'll take anything. You take, for example, in this first one, Guantanamo Bay. It doesn't like the word Guantanamo, and it sees that in the article, and it will automatically demote it and put it further down on the timeline for people. So you'll get way fewer people seeing it. It can be extremely frustrating. So the way that I've kind of worked around that is I've started just taking screenshots of major like news items that I would usually share a link to an article for, and I've started making it into a picture. And these do sometimes 5 to 10 times better than they would as just a link. And Facebook has a really cool tool now where you can test different posts. So if you go into the Facebook content posting editor, it'll give you an option to test out different, and you can test, I think, up to 4 or 5 different posts of the kind of same thing. And then it will automatically choose which one to post based on what's most successful. So it's like A/B testing, but with more options. So that's one way that I kind of figured out that this is a better way to go about sharing news like this. Another thing that does really well, quotes. Quotes do so well. This middle post of a quote from Desmond Tutu was like our 100%, like our biggest post of the year on Facebook. So those do really well. And I use Canva for this. So if you don't use Canva to create stuff, I highly recommend you check it out. It's free. So really recommend that. And then lastly, just really powerful pictures do really well. And of course, here you'll see that I've credited the photographer. So you always want to make sure if you're using an image that someone else took, that they have maybe either copyrighted or have their name on, that you want to credit them and cite them. But these do really well as well. Images. You'll see, as you can see, links and like overly texty kind of information don't do very well on Facebook. And they do better on Twitter than they do on Facebook. But on Twitter, they also do these highly visual posts do really well on Twitter as well. Here's another meme that did really well on Twitter, where this is from last year, if you recall Bernie Sanders being at the inauguration rally. We just put him in a bulldozer with a Palestinian fighting or resisting. That did really well. And this is a good example of when to use tags and when to tag people and when to use hashtags. So I think hashtags are most used on Twitter and Instagram, but you don't want to overuse them. When you just like riddle your text with tags, it tends to kind of lose people's attention, in my experience at least. So you want to use them wisely. So you can see I have just one here. And then, a big thing on Twitter recently has been comparing either pictures or screenshots of articles that really point out hypocrisy in the US. This is one trend content-wise that has been so popular and done so well on CodePink social media, is pointing out the double standards when it comes to literally like anything. And we have a lot of double standards in the US and with US and foreign policy. So pointing that out, it can be as simple as that. You don't even need to say really anything else. People will put 2 and 2 together, and it can be very powerful. So something like this. Now, when it comes to more text-based, I want to be aware of time too. So I'm going to stop soon so we can talk about questions and stuff like that. Pointing out hypocrisy, pointing out nuances, very important. And also just being somewhat stating really just bold, kind of obvious things that you would think are kind of anyone would just automatically assume, can go really far. Starving the Afghan people will not bring justice to 9/11 families. I think most people, if and when they heard about Biden, freezing or stealing half of Afghan money, probably had this thought, but you just put it out there, simple. It doesn't need to be complex. It can go really far if you got a really good point to make. Like, simple, don't underestimate the power of simplicity. It's basically what I'm saying. And quickly, very quickly. I just want to go over Instagram as well. Most visual platform is Instagram. So you can use images like this that are super basic. So like literally, this is after Emma Watson talked about her pro-Palestine stance, literally just like photoshopping a Palestinian flag onto her wands from Harry Potter. Doesn't require much more context than that. Most people on Instagram got this and it did really well. Got lots of comments, got lots of reactions. So it doesn't need to be described or explained to death all the time. That being said, I know I talked earlier about making things accessible. So that's why you have to understand, or I guess choose the times when you're being educational versus the times that you're trying to speak to your like more knowledgeable or advanced audience. There's different ways, excuse me. There are different times to do that because you want to make sure everyone's being kind of catered to. So you want to mix it up. You don't want to make it all kind of this vague kind of Palestinian flag on Hermione's wand all the time. But sometimes that can be very powerful to speak to like your base, for example. One thing I did not put on here, but what Robin brought up are the power of infographics. And I did not even put one up here because they tend to not do as well in terms of reactions or comments, but because they oftentimes talk about things that the base already knows so much about. So those things like infographics are really trying to reach out to people that don't know as much and educate. And for those who don't know, I wish I had put one up here. Infographics, it's basically a way of digesting sometimes a very complex issue into, sometimes it's just one image. Sometimes it can be a series of them. For example, on Instagram, you can post up to 10 images at a time. So we've done series that explain a very complex topic for those who are new to it or haven't, don't have a lot of experience or familiarity with it. If you go onto CodePink's, any of CodePink's social media, we have lots of infographics. So if you want an example of that, please check that out. But I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to stop here. Oh, great. I'm at the end too. So I would love to hear your thoughts and your questions for our remaining time. If you have any.
I have a question. My friend, it's a writer, says that information in table form, people don't like it generally. It doesn't do that well. And I'm an expert at writing tables. I used to be a tech writer. I wrote one about nutrition, which I thought worked very well. Do you know why people tend not to like them?
That's a great question, a great point, Robin. My experience is overly textual stuff that is too uniform looking and too like basically too much text, I think overwhelms people on social media. The human attention span is like dwindling rapidly. And so I think when it's just too much text and too much for people to read, they tend to just scroll right over it when it comes to social media, at least. That's why visual things are doing so much better, is because your eye can take everything in, or a large majority of it in, pretty quickly. And it can catch your eye, and rather than, it's harder to like skim text when you're scrolling. So I think that's why that is, even though I'm sure it's really frustrating when you put all this time and effort into creating great content and it's not appreciated because it's not, people just aren't picking it up. That's really frustrating, and I resonate with that greatly. But that's what I would think is the reason why.
Yeah, I do try to keep the content of each cell brief and put a little 2 or 3 word bold heading, so you can just scan quickly and only read the cells you want.
That sounds like the best way to do it if you're going to do any kind of like heavily textual thing. That sounds like the best strategy. But of course, it's so hard to even, some things that I think will be really highly successful on social media, and I'm like, oh, I'm sure this is going to be great, doesn't pick up always. It's really hard. It depends on who's online, what the algorithm is doing. That can really hinder you, especially on Facebook. So if anyone's struggled with Facebook recently, you are not alone. They have actively decided to depoliticize the platform. So it's not just you. But yeah, so it's a bunch of different factors that go into like what makes something successful or not. And unfortunately, it's not just, the content, it's all these other things that come into play.
I had a question regarding pictures, because you said it's worth 1,000 words, and it's really true. But, the credits for pictures, can you just do the credit, or do you have to, because we don't have a lot of pictures available. So how do you do that to make it relevant and still legal?
Right. That's a great question. And something that Creative Commons, if you're familiar with Creative Commons, it's kind of a workaround with copyright law that allows you to either critique or use certain images for educational purposes, or for purposes to critique something going on. So what I usually do when I don't have an image that I've taken, like a photo, like I'll screenshot a article title, and that's fine under Creative Commons. And I'll do that. And sometimes I'll do, if it's a headline that I think has gotten it totally wrong and is misconstruing information, I'll literally cross out words and put my own word on top to change the framing and perspective. And it's a way of showing what I think are the, media's misinterpretation of things. But that's one way, is if you're screenshotting headline from an article, that's a really good way to do it. Another way is using memes. So if you just go onto any kind of meme generator, they have pictures there where you can add in your own text and kind of make it your own. Another thing that you can do is under the Creative Commons license, if you use an image and you change it enough so that it doesn't look like an exact photocopy, and if you're not using it to make money, if it's purely for educational purposes or something like that, that is 100% fine. Of course, I'm vastly simplifying it, but I think looking up Creative Commons would be really helpful. That's kind of how I go about creating content.
Is that a link, or is that a?
I can, so it's just, I will find it and I can put it in the chat.
Yes, if you would. Thank you.
Yeah. There's also another way to kind of go about this is, if you do a Google image search, there's a filter you can do at the top where you only choose images that are free to use. So there's a way to filter that content, so you're finding just that.
Put that in too, because it says free and then down below it says something.
Yeah, I know. And they don't make it super easy all the time, unfortunately.
No, at all.
Yeah, and it can be complicated. I did a 3-month-long intensive workshop on this, and it's still not totally cut and dry. I realize it's 9:51, or excuse me, 11:51 for you. So I don't know if we need to wrap it up, Lucille, but I can also send you the information that I talked about and how to do the search that we were just talking about.
That would be helpful, because signatures are the hardest thing to get that are legally we can use.
Right.
Because usually the free ones are so generic, you can't use them.
Right. You're right. And, also when in doubt, if it's a photographer that, has their contact information, we have 5 more minutes left for Q&A. Awesome. Thanks, Lucille. if the, the photo, it has the photographer listed, and you can find their contact information, you can always contact them directly and ask. That's very, it's not like an immediate thing. Sometimes you just need something like in the moment.
Yeah.
So I know, but let me see if I want to take another question, but I'm going to take a screenshot
Yeah,
really
go
quick to
ahead.
show you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's see here. Did anyone else have any other questions?
I noticed, especially in this country, a lot of people believe total BS, convinced by corporate lies in media and all kinds of things. And so if you actually tell the truth, most everyone will be against you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that problem. Like the pandemic, I think there's a whole lot of lies and corporate crimes on that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you any idea how to get through these people? I mean, obviously, if you piss them off right away, that won't work.
Yeah, it's really hard, and it's an upward battle. It feels like it's an upward battle a lot of the time. I think the way that I tend to go about that is, one example I was just giving was taking screenshots of big headlines and pointing out, sometimes it's pointing out the hypocrisy. For example, a lot of headlines when talking about the war in Ukraine are rightly upset and outraged, but don't mention anything about the wars that the US has waged. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, it was my timer. The wars the US has waged. And so I use that, these headlines sometimes. Of course, you can't just use anything. It takes a lot of kind of hunting for the right thing, but to cross out words and put in other words to point out. I had some examples on my slideshow of kind of replacing words to change the meaning or to provide more context or nuance to often very generic and one-sided kind of headline. Let me see if I have that and I can just quickly share it. Well, here's one. This is actually the same idea that I just did with a tweet. Let me share my screen again really quickly. So this one right here, actually this wasn't, this was our Code Pink, and one of our national directors did it. And so she took kind of a more, mainstream narrative that Rubio, Marco Rubio was talking about, and provided an alternative explanation or narrative by adding in her own words. She added in her own words and changed a couple. And that way it shows people what the mainstream media narrative is, while also like pointing out the not so mainstream narrative that is what I would say is the truth. But that's one way to kind of point that out. And I think when people see it, see both narratives kind of in front of them, it allows them more ability to kind of decipher that information, make their own decisions rather than just being told what it is, if that makes sense. That's not the easiest to read example. Is that, I just got a thing about breakout rooms. Does that mean we're heading out soon?
Yeah, we have like 45 seconds left in
Okay.
here. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
It was really great talking with you.